Greetings everyone and welcome back to 365 Days of Prog. Today we're going to be reviewing Grace for Drowning by Steven Wilson, and I am joined by Brent from the Similitude of Prog. Hello Brent, welcome to the show.
Hey everybody, hi Naomi, how are you?
Amazing. So we'll start right after the intro.
Hi, my name's Naomi. I'm an avid progressive rock fan, but I'm a long ways from knowing all the prog albums out there. But this year, I'm gonna give it a try. This is 365 Days of Prog.
So, as I said, today we're going to be reviewing Grace for Drowning by Steven Wilson. This is one of those multiple occurrences of either Steven Wilson or Porcupine Tree on the channel, and I'm really excited for it. But of course, beforehand, we have to hear some of my favorite bits from this album, and unfortunately, Brent, you don't get any, because that's just how we do things around here. So here's some of my favorite bits from this album. Like, how long do you know this one? And like, yeah.
I remember picking this album actually when they sold CDs in the CD stores, the day of its release, back that many years ago. I was a fan of Porcupine Tree previously, so when Steven Wilson decided to put them on hold and release Insurgente and then Grace, I picked it up, and yeah, it was a memorable day because I really loved this album at the time. It was probably my favorite thing he had done up to that.
How did you perceive like Steven Wilson going solo, going rogue for the first time? What did you think of his first album, and like as a continuation, what do you think of this one?
Well, when Porcupine Tree originally broke up, it kind of, I'm not going to say it broke my heart, but they were probably one of my favorite bands at the time. And yeah, it was kind of a hard thing to swallow. But at the same time, I knew that anything that Steven Wilson was going to do was going to be gold. So that was all right. I mean, you did feel bad for the rest of guys. But I mean, they've all had numerous other side projects, and some of them have been very popular. But yeah, it was a little bit of a shock. But when I heard Insurgentes, I thought, yeah, he's going to go in the right direction. And eventually he's going to repeat himself the same thing as he did in Porcupine Tree. And for more or less, he has, right from the poppy stuff right to the hardcore prog. So hindsight, it wasn't that big of a deal, but I'm sure glad they're back together, and I hope I hope they stay together. Insurgentes and Grace Grace for Drowning, rushing my head, are very similar in their sound. I think Insurgentes is a little more dense, but you can tell that they're kind of pulled from the same inspirations and stuff. Completely different from The Raven, of course, but everybody knows that. And I mean, The Raven is definitely my favorite Steven Wilson album, but the first two albums, like I said, are very similar.
Listening to Grace for Drowning, it was kind of odd to me in a sense. And now I guess that as an overall question, like when looking at Porcupine Tree, which part of their discography do you like most? Like their earlier stuff or their later stuff before, like, of course, they went into this hiatus up until recently?
I really get interested in their music probably, I'm going to say, Stupid Dream. That's kind of was my introduction into the group. So the earlier stuff, most of it I can take or leave it. The Sky Moves Sideways is actually probably my favorite of their really early stuff. I would have to say that Deadwing is probably my favorite Porcupine Tree album to date. Fear of a Blind Planet is up there too, but I find the production on it is a little bit thin.
Overall, I will assume that you know all, if not most, of Porcupine Tree's and Steven Wilson's discography. How do you view like the two when compared to one another? Would you say that you overall prefer Porcupine Tree, or do you prefer the Steven Wilson solo works?
I'm going to say, just because of the variety, I'm going to go Steven Wilson. I think people would get to know him better through his personal solo stuff than Porcupine Tree. But from a musician's point and a prog point, then I would say Porcupine Tree.
My personal acquaintance with Steven Wilson's solo work had to be, I think it started off with The Raven That Refused to Sing, and then I moved onwards with the series and I listened to Hand Cannot Erase, and now I listen to Grace for Drowning. And currently, I think it kind of stands on the same level as Hand Cannot Erase for me, but for different reasons mainly. I found this one to be a bit long. It is like a double CD, and that's something. The shorter compositions on here were actually mostly my favorites, and there are certain really long tracks on here. There's one, what's it called? Something 2.
Raider.
Raider 2, which is a very long track. It's I can imagine it's like some sort of suite, which I didn't quite get. And my personal favorite from this album is actually track 1, which is one of the more obscure ones, I think, from the album. Like, not a lot of people would really go back to this one, yet I listened to it and I was like, so thrilled by it. It has like the orchestral arrangements. I think Pat Mustellato is on the drums even, which, so he's like adding his own stuff, and there's this really nice sort of fairy tale vibe to it, with the contrast of something very bright then turning into darkness and coming back. So I don't know, I really like this one.
I like it too. That guitar riff in it on the classical guitar is just beautiful. And, I can see why you would really like it. It is very pleasant.
But to understand like the differences of perception, because I would imagine that you like this album very much so, what would you say is your favorite track from the album, that one that you would come back to the most?
Probably Remainder, the Black Dog. I just love the piano riff, how it kind of just creeps in and is very menacing, and then it just turns into a good jam section. Another reason I really like it is because Steve Hackett plays the solo on that, and he's probably my favorite guitarist, so maybe he gets bonus points for that, I don't know.
So when listening to this album, I know that it's not a purely instrumental album, yet when I finished listening to it, it left the impression of an instrumental album. Like, the vocals didn't play such a big role in it. You have those albums which are lyrically based. You kind of don't remember the vocals because they're singing all the time. Yet this one was very subtle with the way that it handled vocals, lyrics, and singing as a whole. Steven Wilson is actually well known for, creating compelling lyrics, and he's known for his vocals, and it's a personally subjective thing if you think that he's a good singer or not. But what would you say, like, as a whole, how big of a part do vocals play in this one?
I agree with you. It is very sparse that way. There's a lot of music on here, and not a lot of the lyrics are very to the point and very short. But I've never really thought of it that way. This is kind of a new way of thinking about it.
If you'd look at like the 2 CDs, so like tracks 1 to 7 and then tracks 8 to 12, which one is like the better one? And if you own this one on CD, as you said, then sometimes you just have this choice of which one to choose, basically, if you're not listening to the entire thing.
Easily probably the first disc. I don't find there's a lot on the second half. Maybe Raider 2 that really I would go back to and specifically listen to. I usually, when I listen to albums, I listen right from start to end, so it doesn't matter. But if I was going to pick a song off that, it'd probably be Raider 2, and the rest I would just play when I throw it on naturally.
Yeah, sure. I've basically always loved The Raven That Refused to Sing. I think it's a wonderful album. I really, really like it. It's like definitely a peak, not only for Steven Wilson, but for the world of prog as a whole. Yet, I would have never believed if someone told me that Grace for Drowning was the album to predate it, because there's so much difference between the two. Did you, by the way, like, acquire The Raven That Refused to Sing sort of when it came out? And what was your perception of it, like, at first, when comparing it, of course, to the one that came before it, to Grace for Drowning? And which one is your favorite, like, between the two?
Grace definitely is my favorite. Or not Grace, The Raven is definitely my favorite. I remember getting it home and listening to it like 2 or 3 times straight. I think I ended up phoning in from work and saying I'm taking that Monday off. I don't know, it just blew my mind. It was one of those albums that I just could not walk away from it, and I think I drove everybody nuts playing it, but that's how important it was to me at the time.
So let's talk a bit about this album's cover. Personally, I like this one. I like this one quite a bit, actually. Of course, it sort of follows the theme that would become more and more apparent of Steven Wilson liking to put himself on the album covers. And this one, I couldn't help it but, see some similarities between this cover and Deadwing, with like the backlit figure and some sort of semi-pastoral place. It is made to look like it's an old cover, like, dust and scratches and stuff like that. So what do you think of this? And I'll ask you another question. A lot of the times when I review covers on the channel, I sort of try to think to myself, how well do they actually represent the music of the album that they are for? So yeah, what do you think of this cover, and how well does it represent the music of Grace for Drowning?
I think it represents it very well. Like I was saying before, it's kind of got an early fall kind of a feeling to it. You get your oranges and your, I guess, blacks. If I'm comparing it to other album covers of him, it's pretty high. You look at Insurrentes and it's just, I think that's the stupidest cover he's ever done, but I don't get it. But this one, it just, I don't know, it seems to fit the overall feeling of that album really well.
I think it does very well represent the music on here. Like when I think of the songs, when I listen to them, the cover just lingers in my head in a sense. It feels like the music. There is something about artists that like feature themselves prominently on a cover that most of the time feels kind of cheap to me. I don't know, that's just my personal opinion. There are plenty other ways of like making a cover that shows you, but is more, thought-provoking, like this one, like Grace for Drowning, which you can definitely tell that it's Steven on the cover. At least I would be surprised if it isn't. But again, it's not the only thing on here. There's a bigger story to be told, and that's personally why I actually really like this cover.
You could pick any song on there and it would tell a story, and it would all kind of feature that kind of a background where Future Bites, you just have he looks goofy on that cover, and it does not suit it at all.
When looking at this album as a whole in comparison to other Steven Wilson and Porcupine Tree, or just generally in the world of music and your overall reception of this one, how would you rate it from a rating of 1 to 10?
I'd give it 8.5. It's one that I don't think I think would be essential if you were a true prog music collector, not just an average listener. I think you would need this in your collection. It's worthy of that, in my opinion, for sure.
Personally, I would rate this one with like a medium 7, let's call it. There are certain parts on here which I think are like a 6, but overall, looking at this as an entire album, I would have to say that it's a solid 7. Just maybe a bit too long for my taste. I kind of just lost interest in it after a while, and that doesn't really surprise me, seeing as I'm not a huge fan of like the Steven Wilson sound as it is.
Well, thanks for your time, Naomi. I've really enjoyed this, and if anybody wants to view my stuff, you can just find me at the Similitude of Prog. I have a Facebook page, a YouTube channel, and a website that's kind of up and running and hit and miss, but there's also a radio station which I run on there too that's playing live, so if you have an interest in that, please check it out.
So of course, all the links to all of your channel, website, they're all in the description. Go check the Similitude of Prog. They're a great channel. I honestly think that you're one of the first prog related channels that I discovered on YouTube. So I've been subscribed for a while now, and just a very lovely channel, great reviews, great everything. So thank you so much for coming here and talking about Grace for Drowning, a very special album by a very special musician. And yeah, you'll make another appearance in something else on the channel, but I'm not gonna say what it is quite yet. But that's about it, guys. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and stay tuned for tomorrow because we're going to be listening to the album Coma by the band Nemo. I of course want to thank my lovely supporters over on Patreon, so thank you so much to Clay Wallenburst of Kings and Lindsay Haycox. You guys are just the best, and if any of you want to support me over on Patreon, you can find the link down in the description or in my about page. But that's about it, guys. Have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Bye, guys.
Bye.
We've made it. We've made it. We made it. Yeah, yeah.